Dementia is a scary and unknown process. And there are a bunch of resources for understanding the stages of dementia and how dementia progresses. But what they don't generally tell you is where and how you lose independence. The ability to live your life the way that you want to live it in a way that's really meaningful for you. They also don't often tell you when you're destined to have full-time care and you really just can't function on your own. Today, we'll cover those hard truths. The terrible truth is that we live with a demon. It is a stealing, cheating, robbing, horrible demon called dementia that takes everything away in a really painful process. That's not normal aging. So one thing I want to clarify is that we're not talking about normal aging today. We're talking about something that's causing a dementing disorder and the process that people go through when they struggle with it. So we're going to use my sweet daddy as an example of this process. My sweet daddy was this tall, Swedish Minnesota farmer. Now, my daddy loved his independence. There's this funny lore in our family about how when he was in college, he tried to make money and support himself by working as a shoe salesman. And as the story goes, he didn't last very long as a shoe salesman, dressing up and having a boss and working with these kind of potentially dissatisfied customers. That didn't really work for him. So his MO was on the farm, and it was being independent and out in the land and working with it and producing something and seeing these concrete results, really having charge of his own schedule, his own work, the farm that he built and grew that just flourished over time. So independence was a really big thing for my father. Everyone in our family knew that Mom took care of Dad's needs throughout his lifetime. And this just ran the gamut of knowing and making all of his favorite foods, to ironing his handkerchiefs. She supposedly used to iron his underwear as well as many other pieces of clothing of his, and I guess eventually stopped because he didn't care and she thought that was a little overboard. But just keeping the house immaculate and bringing him his orange juice and popcorn when he watched his favorite television shows at night. And yes, orange juice and popcorn was a thing in our household, and you should try it. And we all knew that she would keep taking care of him as he got older. But what we didn't anticipate was his loss of independence as he traveled through stages of Parkinson's disease with some level of dementia. As my daddy faded, it was so subtle. When you wash your jeans several times and the color slowly begins to fade in a way that you don't even really recognize and you think is just kind of perfect? Well, he faded that way too. So we're going to go through these stages of dementia to see what happened for him, but also what could happen for you or your loved one. There are several models or ways of thinking about the stages, and we're going to focus on one of the easiest ones, a 3-stage model of dementia, so that we can really highlight what does it mean for independence. This model consists of 3 stages: mild, moderate, and severe. So in the mild stages of dementia, people start showing mild problems. They might forget details and need them repeated again, or forget that they've already asked for information that's been given to them. I remember calling my parents, and I was in graduate school and then living my new life, but I would call home and, from 500 miles away, I would tell them about things and be all excited, and Mom would quickly put Dad on the phone. He was so interested in my life and wanted to know everything, and he would later share it with her. So as I was talking to him, at some point I noticed he might ask the same questions again, or may not completely understand the context of what I'm talking about, but I brushed it off. My sweet daddy couldn't be having any problems because he was basically perfect. And it's really easy to do this in the mild stages. You don't notice problems or you write them off as related to other things. This happened for us. In the mild stage, you're going to probably need more structure to keep things organized. So using things like planners and calendars, and for people who have smartphones, using them, using reminders, and so on. My sweet daddy was always very organized. He had his office, his big desk, all of his files, and he ran something called the books. And the book was basically a mini bank where he would keep track of what we worked and what he would pay us. Yes, I did start out making $1 an hour, which I'm sure if you asked my older siblings was much more than what they started at. But he would track it, and we would know how much we had. He would pay us interest for keeping money there over time. We would be charged interest if we borrowed money. I mean, it was an amazing system for tracking and just teaching us how to understand and work with money. But he was always so organized. He always did his own taxes and all of that. And he became more reliant on those things. He wrote more things down. There were more notes. It evolved. People can start losing things more frequently and be frustrated when they can't find them. Their keys, your glasses, your cell phones. Yes, we all lose them, but in the mild stage of dementia, it just gets worse. You can also have more problems producing words fluently. You know, the tip of the tongue thing, we all have it starting about in our 30s or so, but that gets worse for people, markedly worse for people. With my sweet daddy, he was always this quiet guy who liked to listen. But it seemed like in that stage, he just developed a greater capacity for listening, and he would be even more quiet, which again, didn't seem all that remarkable because that was his basic personality to begin with. Things can get exacerbated. In the mild stage, it might be harder to organize and track medications, and you might need to develop some kind of system that is more organized and more prompting to be able to take them on a regular basis. You might also forget or not be able to easily complete some of the same sequences and actions and activities that you've done for years. So whether for my daddy that was being outside and working with the tractors and tools and so on, for someone like my mother, it might be all of the recipes that she's always known, forgetting some of the details of them, maybe having to look them up, maybe forgetting an ingredient while cooking. So in the mild stage, people just start having mild problems and kind of, oh gosh, I can't believe I did that sort of things. This happens more frequently. They can also find it harder to plan, organize, and follow through on more complicated things. So if it's cooking the big family meal, that might just get harder to do. Or you might not be able to sequence everything so all the food is ready on time. For others, it might be putting together the tax information for the year, and it might take much longer and be much more complicated or harder to do. This is the mild stage of dementia. As I said, my father lived within a system that met his needs. And it wasn't just my mother in the background feeding and clothing and kind of catering to his every wish and demand, but it was also my siblings. One of my brothers was farming with him. And so they had this joint operation where all of that outside work was shared. So as things got a little bit more difficult, it was harder to track things or do things, my brother could pick up the slack and make it a little easier and make sure that things were organized. It all came together. In the mild stage, many people can also find it harder to drive to new places or may feel a little less comfortable driving. With my family, this was pretty remarkable because my mother and father used to take long, wandering, exploring vacations throughout the United States. There are very funny stories where my older siblings were literally packed in the trunk, and I think they took out the back seat of like a station wagon or something. And they would pop all of these little kids, you know, back in the days where people didn't use car seats or seat belts nonetheless. But they would pop the kids in the back with snacks and with all their bags, and they would drive. They would drive for hundreds of miles and go on adventures. That changed over time so that they seemed to stay closer to home. The long wandering vacations kind of went away, and they would go to my siblings' homes for holidays and for meals and for visiting and such. But the long, extensive driving seemed to disappear. So one major point in this mild stage is that even though things are changing with the appropriate level of patience and accommodation and aids and assistance and structure and systems, you can still be independent. This is your best life. This is the place that you want to live. These are the golden years of the dementing process because you still get to be you. This is where we want to stay as long as possible. In the second stage of moderate dementia, all of those things that we talked about just get harder. A person might not be able to take their medications independently anymore. And even with a pill organizer and reminders, it just becomes more and more difficult to take them correctly. It may require a fancy system, or it may require other people to have hands-on help. Finances become more difficult. And so it might be that people start forgetting to pay bills or paying bills repeatedly without meaning to. If they're online and they're trying to do online banking, forgetting passwords and not being able to get in or confusing what's happening is just more and more common. This is where family members often step in to either collaborate more heavily together to make sure everything is on the up and up, or to step in and take over things. You'll hear the phrase, we took over bill paying so that you wouldn't have to worry about it. You don't have to stress about those things anymore. Judgment may go down. So making less sound decisions about, oh, it's fine, leaving the pot on the stove won't be a big deal and I'll remember when it's not remembered. Or, oh yeah, I'm leaving the house to go do these things, but I didn't bring the things I needed, or I didn't think ahead of what the plan should actually be. Or people become more and more vulnerable to financial scams. Somebody contacts them or they get something in the mail, and it's more difficult to differentiate. Is this an ad? Is this a bill I have to pay? Is this real? Am I really in trouble? Is my grandson really in jail in Mexico? Gosh, I didn't even know he was in Mexico. Do I have to send money? I may send money. This is a real problem. Names can get harder, so mixing up family members' names, not always recognizing who is who. This can be very disconcerting for family members who are surprised that their loved one makes mistakes with things like that. Grooming and dressing may decline, so you might have a family member who was immaculate, always dressed to the hilt, or hair done, or makeup done, or just really presented in a certain way, and that stops happening. The haircut doesn't happen, the makeup doesn't happen. Maybe people don't change their clothes as regularly, and they may not even bathe as regularly. Someone needs to step in and make sure that the clothes leave and get changed and that there's enough washing and so on to at least maintain health and safety, whether or not somebody's looking their sparkling best. These changes in everyday life can continue to accumulate over time until the people that are helping the concerned family members, the caregivers, come to a point where they realize that they can't leave a loved one home too long. And here's where the changes start happening, where there's this stress that you can't live your life independently. You can't have time and space to yourself for too long because something might go wrong. These are real threats to independence, and it gives flashbacks to when you're a child and you're not allowed to be home too long on your own. There's no malintent here, like I'm going to treat this person like a child, but it's true concern for, can this person be safe and healthy? Personality changes can even appear, where someone who never behaved this way in the past might become paranoid or suspicious or confused or angry, things that would not be consistent with their personality, who they've always been. And the biggest threat to independence for many, many people is often the ability to drive and how that comes into question. For a Minnesota farmer, driving is life. You've been doing it since what, you're 10 or 12? So the idea that people at this stage start to lose the ability to be safe. And it's not just, oh, I might get lost or not know where I am. That's the least of my concerns as a provider for people. If you get lost, but you're able to be safe and you're able to troubleshoot in some way and make your way home, great, drive all you want. But it's when people can't make sound judgments, when their processing speed slows down, when things change, and it's not just the automatic turn the car on and drive, but things are happening in the environment where you need to adapt, driving safety goes down. And at some point, generally in this stage, there is an authority figure. It might be a provider, a medical provider. It might be a police officer. It might be the people at the DMV. It might even be a family member who has some level of power in the relationship, but they start to question safety of driving. And at some point, the system comes into play where people usually have to stop. This can be devastating for people in terms of their sense of independence because it's so closely tied to being behind the wheel. Without the supports of my mother and my siblings and all the things that were in place for my father, he couldn't have stayed on the family farm. The team came to his aid and made things happen so that he continued to be healthy enough from a physical perspective, safe enough from all the things that he wanted to do on the farm. Yes, he restricted his actions and made his world smaller, but there was a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that he was still able to do that. He needed their help, and his independence dwindled as my mother and siblings and other people stepped up to make sure that things got done. While he had this support, many people do not, and more things build up until changes have to be made. There often is a need for more caregiving help, whether this happens at home for people or there's a move that's necessitated. You have to go to some organization, assisted living, or something like that where there's more resources and more structure and support available. Maybe it's living with a family member if you're lucky enough to have one where that makes sense. The main point at this stage is that regardless of the structure and supports and all the things that used to keep you independent, there needs to be more help. The level of independence decreases dramatically. This is where people truly feel and struggle with their loss of independence. This is an emotionally taxing time for the person with dementia and all of the people around them. The system is strained and a lot of change has to happen. This stage begs for support, and doing it alone is a terrible idea. We finally reach the third stage, the severe stage of dementia. This is where a person's body is starting to fail in much more significant ways. They might show real problems with memory, where they hear or see something and within seconds or minutes the information is gone. They may speak much less as their brain loses the ability to access a rich vocabulary that they used to have. They may struggle to recognize and communicate their basic needs. So things like having pain, being hungry, being too hot or cold, or needing to go to the bathroom can be difficult for people to even recognize. And if this is recognized, it can be difficult to communicate clearly. So getting their needs met can become so much harder. People in later stages of dementia can often become very slow and unbalanced. So they may need to spend much more time in a wheelchair or in bed, and they may fall much more frequently, or we may worry about them falling. This evolves so that people become much more dependent on another person for all of their care needs. This is for all of the basic things like cleaning themselves, grooming, dressing, eating, and going to the bathroom. This stage is also notable for problems with basic bodily functions. So things like being incontinent and having difficulty swallowing. And when a person struggles to swallow their food, this can lead to problems where they inhale their food. It goes down to their lungs, a type of aspiration pneumonia, and this can lead to death. This stage evolves to the clear hallmark of the end. Moves to nursing homes are much more common and sometimes necessary to relieve burdens of people who are so overextended as caregivers. Memory care units sometimes become the only logical choice. Hospice may be involved in some cases. My sweet daddy was crumbling in the face of Parkinson's disease. More and more confusion, more falls, until finally a fall led to a broken hip, a surgery that nearly killed him, entry into the nursing home that he never wanted to be in, and the end. This was an end he never wanted, and an end that none of us wanted for him. The path of dementia is hard, and today we've revealed the truth of what happens for people on that path, and especially in terms of their loss of independence. But we haven't talked about what to do at every step to maximize what you have and to keep your independence. This is about quality of life at each stage. So click on the subscribe button and hit the little bell so that you're notified when I release my next videos. Those videos are going to talk about what to do in the mild and moderate stages of dementia, how to maximize your independence and really have the best quality of life. I wish I could have given these ideas to my sweet daddy, but now I can give them to you. So thanks for coming, and I hope that I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.